In today's video, I'm going to be ranking every single week for the 2025 college football season based on how awesome it looks on paper. Now, this isn't like a guarantee of like these will be the best weeks of the season. Every year, there's multiple weeks that fly under the radar or look like a quote unquote dud week, which a real college football fan would never say there's a dud week. That's probably a casual. And then it sneaks up and surprises you, and it's one of the best weeks of the season. So this isn't like an end all be all, but without further ado, let's just get into it. We'll start at number 15, where I've got week 0. This week is going to be at the bottom of a list of this nature every single year without fail. It just does not have as many games and can't hold up to the other weeks. Now, with the other weeks, I'm not going to be able to show every game in the week, but I am able to show every game that's in week 0. There's only 5. You've got Iowa State versus Kansas State, big matchup in Dublin between two Big 12 title contenders. And what I will say is, while week 0 is last among all the college football weeks this year, it is one of the best week 0s we've ever had. You've got that contender clash between Iowa State and Kansas State that I talked about. Wish it wasn't at a neutral site, but whatever, neutral site, it's fine. It's week 0. We've got Fresno State at Kansas. Kansas is breaking in a brand new stadium against Fresno State. That's a lot of fun. Fresno State with a head coach with championship pedigree, and Matt Entz won multiple national titles at North Dakota State. Stanford at Hawaii. It's always fun to watch Hawaii take on a power conference opponent. And then even Sam Houston and Western Kentucky. It's a pair of teams that were CUSA contenders last year. Obviously a lot of new with both of those teams this season, but it could still be a high caliber clash, and at the very least it's a conference matchup. And then Idaho State at UNLV, one that some people might still not tune into, but it's one that nobody would have tuned into if it was on any other week of the season. But now maybe some people will tune in, see what that new Dan Lanning offense looks like, see what Idaho State looks like this season, a team that definitely has a little bit of intrigue from the FCS level. Coming in at number 14, though, I have week 6. Now, week 6 is surprisingly low for a full or mostly conference week. By week 6, most conferences are well into conference play, and so you expect the matchups to be deeper. You expect there to be more good matchups across the country. But for some reason, week 6 just doesn't have the same depth, and it does have some top-tier matchups that look solid on paper, right? Vanderbilt at Bama. Bama with a chance for revenge against Vandy. You've got Texas at Florida, what could be a trap game. Boise State at Notre Dame, 2 playoff teams from last season. Clemson heading into a trap. Miami heading into a trap. Kentucky, Georgia is sometimes good. But the more you look at these top-tier matchups, the more you realize a lot more of them could end up lopsided. And it's more likely that some of these will be blowouts than not. Like Notre Dame, probably going to be favored by double digits versus Boise State. North Carolina, probably going to be multiple touchdown underdogs to Clemson. Florida State, probably still going to be a severe underdog to Miami. Georgia, probably going to beat Kentucky soundly. And those close games you think of recently, they all happened in Lexington. Georgia has pretty much dominated Kentucky when they have to go on the road. Minnesota, Ohio State, again, Minnesota could be an appealing sleeper underdog if this game was in Minnesota. But in Ohio State, I just don't see it happening in the shoe. Vandy's still going to be probably multiple touchdown underdogs versus Bama. So while some of these games might be interesting storyline-wise in the first quarter, I can't guarantee a lot of them will still be interesting by like even the third quarter. So that's why week 6 ranks down at 14. At number 13, I've got week 9. Now, week 9 does have some of the same pitfalls that week 6 has, where some of the marquee matchups just look like they could get a little out of hand potentially, but also the top tier matchups just aren't super appealing. Now, you do have these 3 SEC battles, A&M at LSU, Ole Miss at Oklahoma, Bama at South Carolina. They all look pretty appealing right now. Pretty much all 6 of those teams are either near or in the top 25. I just think that by the time we get to week 9, a lot of these teams will have cannibalized each other in SEC play. And so if those are the games you're asking to carry this slate, they might not look as appealing if LSU has 3 losses, or if Ole Miss has 2 and Oklahoma has 2, or something along those lines. The Big Ten games are solid. Getting a couple rivalry games in there, one from the Big 12 as well, Kansas State, Michigan State, gives it a little bit of extra juice. It's a pretty weak slate in the ACC, to be honest. Syracuse, Georgia Tech was the one I included from there because I guess there's some intrigue there. Syracuse coming off a double-digit win season. I think they'll regress this year. Georgia Tech, I think, could be a contender. It just feels like there's something missing from the week 9 slate, and that's why it's here in the number 13 spot. Coming in at number 12, I've got week 13. It is the annual SEC Cupcake Week, which people always push back on that when I include an SEC game and say, how could you say the SEC is holding this slate back when you've included some of their games? And it's because the SEC is really deep. The SEC has a lot of good teams. It is still a bummer when a lot of the good SEC teams late in the season in November are playing the Citadel and are playing UMass and are playing I think one of them this year plays like it's a Charlotte. Georgia plays Charlotte this week, I think. So it's just the games we're robbed of. I love watching these top tier SEC games, and we get Tennessee at Florida, which is solid. Missouri at Oklahoma is a decent rivalry as well. But then, the rest of the slate does pick up a little bit. Like the ACC brings it this week with Miami at Virginia Tech after that Hail Mary last year, Louisville SMU, a couple of contenders. And then there's also a little bit of rivalry juice here that could carry this week and did carry this week up a couple spots. You've got the Cal Stanford, Duke North Carolina, USC Oregon. Underrated games, I think, there. And a surprisingly weak slate for the Big 12 this week in Week 13. But overall, just kind of a mediocre week because of some of the matchups we miss out on. At number 11, I've got Week 11. Again, some solid headliners here. LSU at Alabama, Indiana at Penn State. Some games that could be really good and could be top 10 matchups. But then again, LSU plays a really tough early season schedule. Maybe they've taken a couple losses by then. Maybe Bama's struggling. Maybe Indiana's not quite the team they were last year. Florida at Kentucky, Oregon at Iowa, even Florida State at Clemson, all games that on paper look semi-intriguing but don't really hold up to scrutiny when you consider that, again, could be some heavy favorites in those games. We do get a great Group of 5 battle in Tulane at Memphis, and there's a few solid Group of 5 matchups and some decent ones in the Big 12, but you could really say that about the Big 12 most weeks. So Week 11 sitting here at spot 11. Coming in at number 10, I've got Week 3. This is the lowest rated of the non-conference heavy slates where you've still got a lot of teams playing in non-conference games. That's not to say that it's all non-conference. There's a few conference games in here, and you could argue that those are some of the best games. Georgia at Tennessee, Florida at LSU, Clemson at Georgia Tech. Those are some pretty phenomenal matchups. Shout out to Arkansas at Ole Miss as well. Underrated rivalry game there. And then, and speaking of rivalries, the Backyard Brawl, which gives a lot to this. But overall, the depth lacking a little, as it often does for these non-conference slates. It gets a little boost in my book just for some of the unique matchups we're getting. Oregon State at Texas Tech, Texas A&M, Notre Dame, flipping that home and home. Same with Wisconsin at Alabama. So there's some unique matchups here and some things to like, some charm to Week 3, and to me that carries it up to the 10 spot. At number 9, I've got Week 12. This is where we start to turn up the heat a little. You start to notice the quality really increasing of some of these games. We've got Florida at Ole Miss, a big SEC battle. South Carolina at Texas A&M, potentially a revenge game there for Texas A&M after getting blown out at South Carolina. My cat trying to jump into the frame, and there's the tail of the cat. Picking up where I left off before I was rudely interrupted by my cat. There are some really good games in here and some potential trap games and some revenge games, right? Notre Dame at Pitt is solid. Minnesota maybe could threaten the Ducks as well. Again, another tough road game for Minnesota in there. And then some solid ones in the Big 12. Wanted to highlight Utah at Baylor, one that I think could potentially age really well and be one we're looking forward to. And Clemson at Louisville, a ton of intrigue. Louisville beat Clemson on the road. So the revenge games, I think, are a big theme here. I mean, Oklahoma-Bama, another one, too, to talk about here. So again, turning up the heat a little, it's starting to get pretty good, and there's some good matchups outside of here even. It's kind of the first week where I do have to omit some that were probably deserving to be mentioned. At number 8 is Week 10, and Week 10 is pretty killer. I mean, you look at that top-tier matchup, Penn State at Ohio State. I mean, Georgia, Florida as a rivalry. Miami at SMU is a top-tier ACC battle. Texas Tech, Kansas State, even Arizona State, Iowa State, the rematch of the Big 12 title game last season. There is some great stuff here. And then USC, Nebraska flying under the radar. South Carolina, Ole Miss, another fantastic SEC battle. And then even one of the fun Pac-2 battles, Oregon State at Washington State. Technically a conference title kind of on the line there. They play each other twice. It's a home and home. So almost a must-watch game if you want to watch both parts of that home and home to get the full sense of the weirdness. So Week 10 really brings it to the table, and that top-tier matchup, my goodness, it is phenomenal. That Penn State-Ohio State game should be cinema, and those games really lift this week up a lot. There is a little bit of depth that is lacking that holds this one back when you look at the full slate, which you're just going to have to take my word on for because I'm only showing, the top 8 games here. At number 7, I've got Week 2, the second highest ranked non-conference slate, or non-conference heavy slate, I should call it, because there's still some non-conference games that fall in here. But again, I really like the fun and quirky matchups that we get, like that we don't usually see. Michigan at Oklahoma, UCLA at UNLV, Illinois at Duke, Virginia Tech hosting Vanderbilt. Like, those are all fun, and some of them are flipping from we saw the team go on the road prior, like Virginia Tech. It's a revenge game for them against Vanderbilt. So those are really fun. A rivalry game with Baylor at SMU, another one with Iowa State at Iowa. So there's rivalry juice, there's unique matchups, and it's pretty decent. I think it's decent. It's definitely a little deeper than week 3, but we're still not talking about crazy depth here in week 2. I just give a lot of points to the quirky non-conference matchups because I enjoy them, and I think it's really fun to get that sample size of referencing conferences and their strength against each other. Coming in at number 6 is Week 7, another one that is pretty awesome to look at. Starts to get you pumped for college football season. Indiana and Oregon. I mean, if Indiana's a top 10 team, again, that's going to be a must-watch. Red River rivalry between Texas and Oklahoma. SEC brings it this week as well. Georgia at Auburn. South Carolina LSU rematch from last year. Florida at Texas A&M. And then we've got a solid Big Ten battle. Michigan at USC produced a classic last year, even though both teams didn't have their seasons pan out quite like they wanted. And then you really love to see the Big 12 with some solid matchups as well. I think ASU at Utah is going to be a big one in Big 12 play. TCU at Kansas State, another solid one to highlight in the Big 12 there. But again, yeah, Week 7, getting stronger, getting deeper, a really high quality, I think just top to bottom, great week of college football. At number 5 is Week 4. Week 4 is like one of the first weeks we get where we have mostly conference play going on. It's kind of like a weird cross-section where we've got some conferences getting into conference play and others still kind of doing the non-conference thing because of the difference in non-conference games. But we're really seeing some high-quality matchups here. And again, I love the rivalry juice, and we get just that here with Florida and Miami, Oregon State at Oregon, SMU at TCU, South Carolina, Missouri. It's really all happening. And then there's some massive games in the Big 12, Arizona State and Texas Tech heading on the road to play Utah and Baylor, Indiana hosting Illinois, a battle between two teams that'll probably be in the top 25, I assume, and then Michigan and Nebraska, a battle between some big brands. So top 8 games, really great. Rest of the slate really holds up really well and pushes this one to a top 5 week to get excited about this season. At number 4, we've got Week 1, which is really unique because Week 1 typically ranks a little bit lower. In fact, Week 1 last year, if you recall, was pretty weak. We were excited about it because it was the opening week of the season. But this year, we've got 3 top 10 matchups, according to the coaches poll, which I know isn't super respected, but you got to imagine it's going to mirror the AP poll a little bit. You got the first ever matchup between number 1 and number 2 to open a season. Bama at Florida State has a ton of intrigue. And then you just go down the list. There are so many intriguing non-conference games and fun ones. You got the 2 at neutral site in Atlanta. You've got Auburn at Baylor, really unique. Georgia Tech at Colorado is really unique. And then, of course, you've got other games that are flying under the radar, like Boise State at South Florida, Cal at Oregon State. There are so many games to love with this Week 1, and I am just so excited to get this season kicked off for Week 1 specifically. At number 3 is a week that will almost always get a podium spot, and that is Rivalry Week, which is Week 14, last week of the regular season. You've just got rivalry games galore across the country. Georgia, Georgia Tech, Clemson, South Carolina, Ohio State, Michigan, the Iron Bowl. Some of the biggest ones that'll probably be most anticipated. Texas actually hosts Texas A&M. The graphic's wrong. Ignore that. But Oregon and Washington, another great one. NC State, North Carolina. You've got LSU, Oklahoma on there, which is a solid game in itself, but I wanted to include that one to paint the picture and prove the point that we are losing a little bit of the rivalry juice in this week because some of the rivalry games have moved off of the last week of the season. I do actually ultimately like that, like spreading the rivalry games out a little bit throughout the year. I don't hate it. I don't necessarily love it either. So I guess I like it, or maybe I'm just indifferent on it. But I think that's made Rivalry Week take a little bit of a hit, but it's still super strong and still one of the top 3 weeks in the country not in the country, but one of the top 3 weeks in college football this year. At number 2 is a week that some people have crowned as the best week of the season, and I'm not even necessarily saying you're wrong if you are. I just have it at second, but it's super strong. Week 5, probably the best 1-2 punch of any week this season. You've got Alabama at Georgia, which was the game of the year last year. Oregon at Penn State, a rematch of the Big Ten title. Obviously going to be like a top 10 at the least, maybe top 5 matchup. 2 monstrous games. Auburn and A&M, LSU at Ole Miss, some solid SEC battles. You look at what the Big Ten brings to the table. Indiana at Iowa, one of their biggest tests early in the season. Ohio State heads in a trap game. USC at Illinois could go either way. And then Notre Dame heads to a trap game at Arkansas. Week 5 is pretty stinking awesome. The depth is really fantastic here, too. There are games across the country that look really sick. And it's one of the first, full weeks in conference play, which you really like to see early in the season. It's kind of going to be refreshing to see these teams coast to coast playing conference games that really have just additional high stakes. But coming in at number 1 is Week 8, my number 1 most exciting college football week of the season. It's got to be week 8, which also happens to be my birthday, which is a pretty sick coincidence. And I didn't even put that together before I ranked this, before you guys try to claim I'm biased towards this week. But Tennessee at Alabama, a rivalry renewed that has just had so much juice recently. And then let's just stick on the subject of rivalries. Utah BYU, one of the most heated rivalries in college football right now. USC at Notre Dame also on there. Baylor at TCU. That alone gets you fired up. And then you look at some of the other SEC battles. Ole Miss beat Georgia last year. Now they have a chance for revenge. Oklahoma, South Carolina is a great game. Seeing Mateer and Sellers go head-to-head, that's crazy. And then in the Big 12, Texas Tech at ASU, the two favorites to win the conference this year, taking each other on. And the ACC, we get a round robin of contenders, basically. SMU at Clemson, Louisville at Miami, and then Boise State at UNLV, arguably the biggest Group of 5 game of the entire season. And the slate just goes even deeper than that. There are several games that I could have included here. I had to free up 2 extra slots to make sure we could get 10 games on here to fully hype this slate up. But I am just absolutely amped to see these teams go at it in week 8, and it's going to happen right at that beautiful point in the middle of the season where we're really starting to learn who the contenders and pretenders are, and I think that is going to make it all the more sweet when week 8 arrives. I am most excited for this week, and I do believe that week 8 is the best week of the 2025 college football season. That does it for this video. Thank you guys for watching. Appreciate you guys, as always, sticking around for this long-form content, bearing with me, watching all this stuff. Going to get some other good content out for you guys. Probably get a final, possibly top 25, and then possibly final, like, CFP predictions out before the season starts. Still trying to decide how I want to, like, format and do that. Also want to talk about some teams that could come out of nowhere. We had a couple that did that last year. Those videos will be out later this week. But as usual, like, comment, and subscribe/follow, depending on where you're watching this. Could be TikTok, could be YouTube. But I appreciate you guys, as always, and we'll look to get some more long-form content out to you guys this week.